as one of the worst typhoons on record ravages the Philippines. Survivors with nothing left, John Donaldson travels to one city where the cries for help are still overwhelming.
Please, come to my city. We need you. We need help.
Taking the world by surprise, our environmental editor David Shukman explains why the force of Typhoon Haiyan was so difficult to predict. And turning to faith, George Alagai reports on the important role the Church is now playing for Asia's largest Catholic population. Hello and welcome to Reporters, where we'll be assessing the impact of Typhoon Haiyan. We now know that millions of people in more than 40 provinces here in the Philippines were affected by this superstorm, one of the strongest ever to make landfall. Well, the survivors have had a very difficult time for the past week, and our correspondent Rupert Wingfield-Hayes has been listening to some of their stories, and you may find some of the images disturbing.
The only way to get someone buried in Tacloban now is to do it yourself. Joseph and his friends have come to collect the body of his sister. For 3 days, it lay uncovered in the street. Now with a homemade coffin and masks to cover the stench, they must carry it on foot to the burial ground.
And the wife of Armando Sr. is still missing.
In the street where Joseph's sister lived, this man is trying to make a list of all his neighbours who are dead.
And he thought they were doing, and that's without the coffin. And the 8 kids at the
8 children, so they've got all children?
Yes.
All children in the car?
Of course, 2... A man and woman we found in that house there.
In that house over there?
Yes, that one, the 2-story house.
It's still really almost impossible to know how many people have died in this devastation, in this disaster. But to give you an idea, we've been told that in this one street here, 18 people died. That's 18 just in this little stretch of road here in one neighbourhood. And many of the bodies are still lying around in the houses here or out in the baking sun, and they're starting to putrefy. In the next street over, Mildred and her family survived by clinging to the roof of their house. For these survivors, the biggest fear now is hunger. On the street outside, they're trying to dry out their waterlogged rice. No one knows for sure if it's still edible. Here the cry is the same. Where is the government? Where is the help?
The most problem here is food. Many people die. We need food. Water we have. Food, rice. That's all we need. That's the most important we need. And all the dead bodies must be buried.
Down by the sea, they're digging a grave for the mother of these 3 young men. Suddenly, one of her sons is overcome by grief and frustration. His mother's body is stuck under a fallen coconut tree, and they can't get it out. I ask her husband, Hill, how they're managing.
Very bad, I looked very bad. I could not sleep. She was a very good mother. I am very hopeless. Everything is gone.
A short distance away, they've dug a much bigger hole, a mass grave. All afternoon, the grim procession continues. We counted at least 30 bodies going in here. How many more informal graves like this are being dug along this coast, we don't know, except that it is many. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, in Tacloban, Central Philippines.
Well, as the full scale of the damage emerged, there were complaints by some that the aid effort was being poorly run. John Donaldson went to see some of the survivors without food or shelter.
There's not much left with a roof in Tacloban. The Astrodome Arena was one of the few buildings big enough to withstand Typhoon Haiyan. and it's now a shelter for hundreds of families who've lost everything. Thousands of people are camped out here in filthy conditions. 7 families are living in this one tent. And finally, there's a team of doctors, one of the first signs of help beginning to arrive. A stair landing is now home for the Anthony family. Lee managed to get his wife, Jessica, and his 7 children here just hours before the typhoon hit. They have 1-month-old twin boys.
Oh, 700 grams.
Lee tells me they have enough baby formula to last just 4 more days. He says only God is giving him the strength to carry on, and that he's lucky his family is still alive.
Thousands of people were seeking shelter here at the Astrodome when the typhoon struck. This was one of the main evacuation centres, but such was the size of the storm surge coming in from the ocean that the water came right up to this balcony.
People can see aid is now being flown in greater amounts, but little has arrived here yet.
Going to places where they think they can find food.
Jose Aguinaldo is a school teacher. Like many, he feels abandoned.
People of the world, come to my city. We need you. Please. Come to my city. We need you. We need help. We need help very badly.
I'm all alone without you.
Until it comes, though, people like Lee are having to comfort their families as best they can.
Your love is
John Donison, BBC News, Tacloban.
Aid supplies did eventually reach some parts of the country, but other areas were completely without power, communications, or food or water. Alistair Leithhead travelled from coast to coast on this island of Leyte to see the damage overall.
Far out on the horizon, an island struck by the eye of the typhoon. The lifeline is a passenger ferry. When the aid eventually comes, this is how it will reach the people. And it's how Rosalind hopes she will find her family. She, her sister, her daughter are on a rescue mission in the hope their parents made it through the storm. They brought a car with food and water, but don't know what to expect on the road ahead.
We just come here to rescue my family because they don't have food no more. I heard from the social network, is Facebook, is the San Isidro Leyte is no more food. Nothing to do. So that's why we rescue our family. I don't know if they're alive or no. We don't have any connection yet.
We followed them on the road north. It's now a familiar sight. House after house destroyed. Trees ripped up and tossed aside. Electricity cables down and hanging in the road. The same landscape for mile after mile.
The reason that communications have been so bad, of course, is because the mobile phone masts have all come down. Roads have been blocked until quite recently. If people have family members they haven't heard from, the only thing they can do is to come out looking for them to these remote areas. And because such a huge area of the central Philippines was affected, getting aid out to all these far-flung places is proving slow.
Afternoon turned to night. The road worsened as we got near to the family home. They didn't know what to expect, seeing all the damage. But then, a family reunited. Everyone's fine. Their homes were destroyed. There's little food nor sign of aid, but they survived.
So I'm very happy, sir, that they're alive. The whole area is alive. That's why. That's most important to me and for my family and my neighborhood here.
One family's story among millions, and the trail of chaos the storm left behind. Alistair Leithhead, BBC News, Western Leyte.
Well, the Philippines is no stranger to violent weather. They have many typhoons each year, but why was this one so strong? Our environmental editor David Shookman has been investigating.
It takes a view from the air to see the extraordinary scale of devastation. Ferocious winds combined with massive walls of water to lay waste to whole communities. All this is the result of weather at its most extreme. For many people, there was simply nowhere to hide. The survivors are now left appealing for aid from the outside world. The typhoon had been forecast, but proved completely overwhelming.
The thing which made it particularly dangerous was the fact that it reached its peak intensity at the point that it made landfall. And on that basis, it might be one of the strongest typhoons to ever make landfall.
To understand this disaster, let's use our virtual reality studio to try to piece together how this catastrophic weather unfolded. Now, the people of the Philippines are well used to the threat of typhoons. They've had more than 20 this year alone, but nowhere near the scale of this one. Like all tropical storms, it began with a loose cluster of thunderclouds. Nothing unusual, but these quickly merged together to form a single weather system which started rotating, pulling air up into its centre. The storm stretched over 300 miles. By now, it was a typhoon, and the heat rising from the warm ocean kept adding to its strength. Higher temperatures mean more energy. This meant that in the eye of the storm and around it, the winds kept accelerating. Intense low pressure also lifted the sea surface to create a storm surge, another source of danger. For anyone in its path, only the strongest shelter would help them survive. Compare the town of Guyane before the disaster with the same view just after it. Almost every house has had its roof ripped off. Here's Tacloban, seen last year. It met a similar fate, the storm hitting with explosive force.
The devastation is staggering.
Today, an official from the Philippines was at a UN climate conference. He's from Tacloban and called for action on global warming.
We can fix this. We can stop this madness. Right now, right here.
An emotional moment. The fact is, though, that no single weather event can be blamed on climate change. But typhoons are fueled by heat in the oceans. The massive size of this one was clearly visible from space. And scientists are warning that storms this vicious may become more likely. David Schuckman, BBC News.
This is a country spread across thousands of islands, and communications are always difficult, especially so after a storm of this magnitude. Our correspondent Andrew Harding went to the place where the storm first made landfall.
This is where it all started. The very first encounter between storm and land. Not much of a contest. Which makes this the first village to be erased. And Maria among the first mothers to lose a child. She'd come here the day before to visit her parents at the beach with her 2-year-old son, Jake.
That time we come here is so full of life. He's so naughty.
When the typhoon roared in, Jake's grandfather tried to save him.
My father been hit by the wood. Then my baby gone. He cannot hold already. Then the baby drowned.
1 week on, and the survivors here are still waiting for aid.
This may have been the first place to get hit, but it seems to be amongst the very last to get any help. That's because this is an extremely remote corner of the Philippines, and the storm essentially cut it off from the outside world.
A few miles away, the town of Guyane is in no better shape. Still hard to believe wind alone did all of this. I've come to see the man in charge here, the 33-year-old mayor, Sheen Gonzalez. The military have been trying to stop looters. Nursing his own injury and twitching with stress, the mayor, like the town, is running on empty.
I have to be okay, because I am the mayor of this town.
You look exhausted.
Very stressful, but I need to be strong.
What do you need most?
Food. We need food and temporary shelters for the people.
Easy to see why. The town's sports hall was supposed to be a sanctuary from the storm. Instead, 12 died here.
This is where my mother was.
Nearby, 19-year-old Elfie Bautista shows me where she and her family were trapped.
My brother and me. I keep calling them, my mom and my dad, but they won't respond. Only my brother beside me. My dad, I can still see him. He was still in one piece, but he was cold and bleeding.
Both parents, a doctor and an accountant, died beneath the rubble. Elfie and her 13-year-old brother Edric were finally able to bury them today in the storm-ravaged cemetery. The children, like the town, left pondering what future they have now.
I want to be like my mother.
A doctor.
A great mother.
Suddenly, a welcome sight overhead. Two big military aircraft fly past. The crowd rushes out to an old airstrip.
If I were them, they have to come here. If they have relief goods, they have to come here, give us food.
How does it make you feel seeing those planes going past?
Seeing this place gives me hope.
And sure enough, the Americans land on a runway they built during an earlier operation here, World War II. No supplies on board, but a multinational assessment team and promises that aid will finally arrive tomorrow. The visitors leave with a 78-year-old grandmother needing urgent kidney dialysis. Then another woman tries to get through. She's got 7 children in another town and is desperate to contact them. No room today. You can sense the frustration building here. Back in town, the queues for fuel, for water, are growing.
This place was cut off for so long, it's not surprising. Things got pretty tense, pretty desperate here. There's been a lot of looting and there's still a state of emergency. And yet what's really striking about this town is how quickly the community has come together again and started to get things done.
People may not have insurance here, but they have phenomenal resilience. For now, Elfie and her brother are leaving to stay with relatives somewhere a little safer inland. But you get the sense this shattered town will recover, slowly, to be sure, from the storm of a lifetime. Andrew Harding, BBC News, Guyuan.
Well, as the week progressed, international aid did eventually arrive. But in the interim, it was local institutions that had to fill in. 6 out of 10 Filipinos are Catholic, and George Alagaya has been assessing the role the Catholic Church played in this disaster.
A place for prayer, now a place for sanctuary. Typhoon Haiyan blew open the doors of the church and the parishioners walked in, grieving and homeless. The pews where they once knelt to worship are now the spaces they call home. Father Edwin Balkaltos is like the Good Shepherd with his flock. He never doubted this was what he should do.
The church is the church for the poor. So we not only do the sacraments, but we have to save lives of people.
6 days on, and he's not seen any official aid here, and he doesn't blame his parishioners for what many have described as looting.
For me, what he did was moral. It was not more immoral, because they're basically, when they loot the store, the shop, the groceries, you want to live. So it's not, for me, it's not a sin.
In all, there are more than 300 families here. That's nearly 2,000 people. Unlike some of her neighbours, Tita Tangolina's family, 3 generations of it, survived the typhoon intact. They described how they clung to each other on a neighbour's roof. All around them there are families with similar stories. Tita said she would take me to her home, just a 5-minute walk away. She'd lived in the house for 20 years and in the area for more than double that.
Doon sa likod ng bahay na yan.
So your house is just behind the big house that's standing?
Wala kami may una-una, mabuliga mo kay.
We felt all alone in that time after the water came in. We were asking and asking, but it seemed nobody was around to help. We needed help with our children and our house. There were no doctors around, and there was no food.
There'll be 4 masses this Sunday as usual. That's one thing that stayed the same when all around them the world is upside down. George Alagaya, BBC News, Tacloban.
And that is all from this special edition of Reporters. From me, Tim Wilcox, and the whole team here in Tacloban. Bye-bye for now.